A single mother brings home a scarred, three-legged dog to comfort her disabled toddler, and in seconds, the room explodes with panic. The child drops. The broken dog moves like a trained guardian, alarms, sirens. Then the strangest thing, there's a burned code on the dog's ear, a missing file at the shelter, and a smooth-talking man who demands the dog back. The first responder says something's off. The dog keeps warning before the next crisis, until one night, smoke fills the hallway and choices turn deadly. If this animal was tossed aside, why does he act like he's still on duty? What secret is he protecting? Who's trying to bury it? And how far will a mother go when the only witness can't speak? Through tear-blurred vision, Tamsin watched the paramedics work with practiced efficiency around her daughter's tiny form on the living room floor. Her hands trembled violently as she clutched her phone, still warm from the frantic 911 call she'd made minutes earlier. The shepherd mix stayed close, his three legs planted firmly against the worn carpet as he observed every movement with alert, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. His scarred body tensed whenever anyone moved too quickly near Ivy. "She's stabilizing," one paramedic announced, his fingers pressed gently against Ivy's wrist while checking her vital signs on the portable monitor. "How long did the seizure last this time?" Tamsin swallowed hard, her throat dry and constricted with fear. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe 2 minutes? It felt like forever watching her like that." She glanced gratefully at Kodiak, who hadn't budged an inch from his watchful position beside the couch. The dog, he started barking in this strange way right before it happened, almost like a countdown. The second paramedic, a woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, looked up with professional interest as she adjusted the oxygen flow. Regular intervals, like a warning bark, almost like he knew? "Yes, exactly that." Tamsin nodded vigorously, wiping her eyes with the back of her trembling hand. "I've never seen anything like it. 3 distinct barks. Then he ran to her bedroom door just before she started seizing." Ivy's delicate eyelids fluttered beneath the harsh living room light, and a small, distressed whimper escaped her pale lips. Tamsin immediately dropped to her knees beside her daughter, ignoring the sharp pain as her kneecaps hit the hardwood floor. She stroked the soft blonde curls away from Ivy's damp forehead, her touch feather-light and desperately gentle. "Mama's here, baby. You're okay now. Mama's right here with you." To everyone's surprise, Kodiak inched closer with deliberate care, his tail held low but wagging slightly in gentle reassurance. He lowered his massive head to Ivy's level, his scarred muzzle just inches from her face, yet with such gentleness it made Tamsin's heart clench. Despite her post-seizure confusion, the little girl's hand reached out instinctively to touch his face, her fingers finding the rough texture of his healed burns. "Doggy," she mumbled, her words slurred but remarkably clear enough to make Tamsin's heart leap with desperate hope. It was the first word she'd spoken all day. "That's right, sweetie. This is Kodiak. He's going to stay with us," Tamsin promised, meeting the dog's steady gaze with newfound understanding. "He's our dog now." The paramedics continued their professional assessment, attaching monitoring leads and checking reflexes. But Tamsin couldn't tear her eyes away from the gentle, protective way Kodiak positioned himself near Ivy. He shifted his weight on his 3 legs, compensating effortlessly as he settled his substantial body where he could maintain eye contact with the little girl. His missing limb and burn scars suddenly seemed less like defects and more like badges of honor to Tamsin, living proof that he'd survived his own terrible battles and emerged with his spirit intact. "Mrs. Kepler," the first paramedic said, closing his equipment case with a snap. "Ivy's vitals are good right now, but given her history and the intensity of this episode, we should transport her to Children's Hospital for observation. They'll want to check her medication levels. Tamsin nodded mechanically, already reaching for Ivy's well-worn emergency bag by the front door. It contained comfortable clothes, her favorite stuffed rabbit, and all her medication information. It was a familiar routine, too painfully familiar for any mother. But something felt profoundly different this time. As they prepared to move Ivy to the waiting ambulance, Kodiak's ears perked forward sharply, and he gave a soft, questioning whine that seemed to fill the suddenly quiet room. "I'm sorry, boy," Tamsin said, her voice catching on unexpected tears. "We have to go now, but we'll be back soon. I promise we'll come home to you." Kodiak's eyes, deep brown and unsettlingly knowing, met hers directly. In that suspended moment, Tamsin felt a flash of recognition so powerful it nearly took her breath away. This wasn't just a shelter dog with a sad past and physical limitations. There was remarkable intelligence in that steady gaze, and something more profound that made her think of the highly trained service dogs she'd occasionally seen moving with purpose through the hospital corridors. As they gently lifted Ivy onto the wheeled stretcher, securing her small body with padded straps, the little girl reached out again, searching the room with unfocused eyes. "Coda," she called softly, her voice barely audible above the radio chatter. Tamsin's breath caught painfully in her throat. Ivy, who rarely connected with anyone outside their isolated small world, who struggled daily with the simplest interactions, was asking for the dog she'd just met hours ago. The dog that had somehow known she needed help before anyone else in the room, before even Tamsin herself. "We'll see him very soon, baby," Tamsin promised fervently, squeezing her daughter's small, limp hand between both of her own. She turned to the paramedics as they prepared to wheel Ivy out. The shelter said he was completely unadoptable, called him damaged goods because of his leg and the scars. They were going to put him down this week. The second paramedic shook her head, a knowing smile softening her professional demeanor. "Sometimes the best helpers come with a few battle scars of their own. They understand suffering in ways others can't." As they carefully wheeled Ivy toward the door, Tamsin looked back at Kodiak, who sat straight and tall despite his missing front leg, his dignity intact and unmistakable. The shelter had been catastrophically wrong. This wasn't a broken, unwanted dog. This was a protector who had somehow found his true purpose again. Through the fog of worry about Ivy's condition and the uncertain hospital stay ahead, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity in Tamsin's exhausted mind. Bringing Kodiak home wasn't just about giving an unwanted animal a second chance. Maybe, just maybe, he was exactly what they both desperately needed, a guardian who understood brokenness and healing from the inside out. The ambulance doors closed with a solid, reassuring thunk, and through the rectangular window, Tamsin could see Kodiak watching intently from the front window of their small rented house. His stance was alert, vigilant, waiting, like a sentinel keeping faithful guard until their return. For the first time in many dark months, despite the emergency unfolding around her and the beeping monitors tracking her daughter's fragile condition, Tamsin felt an unexpected spark of hope flutter in her chest, like a tiny, persistent flame. They weren't alone in their struggle anymore. Something fundamental had shifted in their broken little world today. The fluorescent lights of the pediatric ward cast harsh shadows across Ivy's pale face as she finally drifted to sleep in the hospital bed. Tamsin's fingers were cramped from hours of stroking her daughter's hair, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. The familiar beeping of monitors filled the quiet room. Dr. Morris, Ivy's neurologist, tapped his pen against his clipboard. "The seizures are increasing in frequency. We need to adjust her medication protocol." Tamsin's throat tightened. What does that mean for her daily care? "Round-the-clock monitoring. The next episode could happen at any time. He gave her a measured look. I know you left your nursing position to care for her, but have you considered additional support? We can't afford it, Tamsin said quietly, watching Ivy's chest rise and fall. The insurance barely covers her current treatments. The drive home felt endless. When Tamsin finally pushed open their front door, Kodiak was waiting, his nails clicking anxiously on the worn linoleum. His tail began wagging the moment Ivy's wheelchair crossed the threshold. Hi, Coda, Ivy mumbled sleepily, reaching out one small hand. The shepherd mix pressed his nose gently against her palm, then fell into step beside her wheelchair as Tamsin pushed it toward the bedroom. He watched intently as Tamsin helped Ivy into bed, then settled himself on the floor next to her. You're not going anywhere, are you? Tamsin whispered to the dog. His scarred ear twitched in response, eyes fixed on Ivy's sleeping form. Over the next few days, Kodiak proved himself invaluable. He stayed close to Ivy during her therapy exercises, offering encouragement with soft whines when she struggled. At night, he slept beside her bed, alert to every sound. Tamsin found herself talking to him during their quiet moments, sharing her fears and hopes while he listened with those knowing eyes. The phone's sharp ring shattered their peaceful routine one morning. Tamsin's heart sank as she recognized the shelter's number. Mrs. Kepler, the shelter manager's voice was strained. We have a situation. A man claiming to be Kodiak's previous owner has filed a formal complaint. He says the dog was lost, not abandoned. Tamsin's hand gripped the counter. But you said he was found as a stray, that no one claimed him for months. Yes, but... There was a rustling of papers. The documentation is complicated. He's threatening legal action. Before Tamsin could respond, a knock at the door made her jump. Her landlord, Mr. Peters, stood there with a stern expression and a yellow notice in his hand. The building has a strict policy, he said, thrusting the paper at her. No pets over 30 pounds, and definitely no dangerous breeds. Dangerous? Tamsin's voice cracked. He's been nothing but gentle. He helps with my daughter's medical condition. Rules are rules. You have 2 weeks to remove the animal. The notice trembled in her hands as she closed the door. Kodiak appeared from Ivy's room, limping slightly on his 3 legs, concern evident in his tilted head. The weight of everything. Ivy's worsening condition, the mounting bills, and now this, pressed down on Tamsin's chest until she could barely breathe. A gentle knock interrupted her spiral of despair. Through the door's window, she recognized Keaton Hale, the paramedic from the other day. He held up a paper bag with a small smile. Thought you might need some decent coffee, he said when she opened the door. Hospital stuff is terrible. That's really kind, Tamsin managed, stepping back to let him in. Keaton's eyes tracked Kodiak as the dog moved to check on Ivy before returning to his post near them. How's she doing? The doctors want to adjust her medications. They say she needs constant monitoring now. Tamsin's voice wavered. And I might lose the one thing that's actually helping. She explained the situation, the shelter's call, the landlord's notice. Keaton listened intently, his forehead creasing. Watch this, he said suddenly. He turned to Kodiak. Alert. The dog's posture immediately changed, his ears pricked forward, body tensing with purpose. That's not just good behavior, Keaton said. That's training, high-level training. The way he positions himself, how he responds to commands, I've seen it in service dogs and canine units. But why would a trained dog end up in a shelter? Tamsin wondered. Those scars tell a story, Keaton mused. Something happened to him. Something bad enough to cost him a leg and leave him for dead. He met Tamsin's eyes. Fight this. If he's really a trained service dog, there are laws protecting him, and Ivy's right to keep him. I don't know how, Tamsin admitted. I can barely keep up with Ivy's medical bills. Let me make some calls, Keaton offered. I know people who work with service animals. Maybe they can help trace his background, figure out what happened to him. Kodiak padded over and pressed against Tamsin's leg, as if sensing her distress. She ran her hand over his scarred head, feeling the roughness of healed tissue beneath his fur. In just a few days, this dog had become essential to their lives. He anticipated Ivy's needs, provided comfort during her therapy, and somehow knew when she needed help before even Tamsin noticed. I can't lose him, she whispered. Ivy can't lose him. You won't, Keaton said firmly. Whatever his story is, that dog belongs here now. Anyone can see that. He pulled out his phone. Let me start making those calls. As Keaton stepped into the kitchen to talk, Tamsin watched Kodiak return to his vigilant position near Ivy's room. Despite his missing leg and scarred body, he moved with purpose and dignity. Someone had tried to destroy him, but they'd failed. Now he was here, protecting her daughter with a devotion that defied explanation. The yellow notice sat on the counter like a threat, but Tamsin felt her resolve hardening. She'd fought for Ivy every day since her diagnosis. Now she would fight for Kodiak, too. Whatever his past held, whatever battles lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. This unadoptable dog had become their guardian, and she wouldn't let anyone take him away. Tamsin sat on her living room floor, gently running her fingers through Kodiak's fur while he dozed beside Ivy's wheelchair. The evening sun streaming through the window caught something on his ear, a pattern she hadn't noticed before. Hold still, boy, she murmured, carefully parting the fur. Beneath it, faint burn scars formed what looked like numbers and letters. Most were too damaged to read, but she could make out K9 and what might have been a 4. Her phone buzzed. A text from Keaton. Found something. Coming over? 20 minutes later, he arrived with a stack of papers and a determined look. Those marks you mentioned, I think I know where they're from. There used to be a K9 search and rescue unit about an hour north of here. Shut down 2 years ago after a warehouse fire. A fire? Tamsin's stomach clenched as she looked at Kodiak's scars. The official report said, all dogs were accounted for, but Keaton spread out several printed articles. Look at this photo. The newspaper clipping showed a team of handlers and dogs. In the corner stood a magnificent shepherd mix with distinctive markings that matched Kodiak's remaining fur pattern. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the window, Tamsin saw a well-dressed older man in an expensive suit. His silver hair caught the light as he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Kepler? His voice was smooth as oil. I'm Garrick Sloan. I operate Sloan's Premium Kennels. I believe you have my dog. Kodiak, who had been calm moments before, pressed himself against Ivy's wheelchair, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was adopted legally from the shelter, Tamsin said, keeping the door chain latched. Unfortunate mix-up. He's a dangerous animal, escaped after attacking one of my handlers. I've been searching for months. Garrick pulled out a business card and several official-looking papers. I have all the documentation right here. Sir, Keaton stepped forward, his paramedic uniform lending authority to his presence. If there's a dispute over ownership, it needs to go through proper channels. Garrick's smile tightened. Of course, I've already spoken with Animal Control. They'll be contacting you. He glanced past them to where Kodiak stood guard. Something flashed in his eyes, not concern for a dangerous animal, but something colder. After he left, Tamsin called the shelter. The staff member she spoke to seemed nervous, speaking in careful phrases. "We are reviewing the situation," they said. "Mr. Sloan has connections with the city council and the animal control board." "He's lying," Tamsin insisted. "Kodiak's not dangerous. He's trained, probably as a search and rescue dog." "I'm sorry, I can't discuss this further. The paperwork is being processed." Over the next few days, the pressure mounted. The shelter stopped returning her calls. Emails to the K9 unit's former headquarters bounced back. The animal control officer who had approved Kodiak's adoption suddenly couldn't find their file. "Document everything," Keaton advised, helping her start a log. "Every interaction, every piece of paper, every photo of Kodiak with Ivy. They're trying to bury you in bureaucracy, but we can fight back." Tamsin photographed the burn marks on Kodiak's ear before they could be accidentally altered. She recorded videos of him helping Ivy, anticipating her seizures, providing stability when she walked, staying calm during medical procedures. But for every piece of evidence they gathered, another obstacle appeared. The hospital misplaced records of Kodiak's assistance during Ivy's episodes. Their family doctor's letter supporting the service dog designation was lost in transit. Even Keaton's paramedic report from that first night vanished from the system. "They're trying to isolate you," Keaton said grimly. "Make you feel powerless." Tamsin watched Kodiak gently nose Ivy's hand as her daughter slept. "Why? Why go to all this trouble for one injured dog?" "Because he knows something." Keaton pointed to the burn scars. "Whatever happened in that warehouse fire, Kodiak was there. And someone's willing to do anything to keep that quiet." Tamsin picked up the paper trail they'd assembled. The photos, the documentation, the growing list of coincidences that stood between her and keeping Kodiak. Each piece felt small on its own, but together they painted a picture of systematic obstruction. "I won't let them take him," she said firmly. "Ivy needs him, and I think he needs us too." Kodiak lifted his head, those intelligent eyes fixed on her with absolute trust. Whatever his past held, whatever Garrick Sloan was trying to hide, one thing was clear. This dog had found his way home, and Tamsin would fight with everything she had to keep him there. The next morning, a frantic knock startled Tamsin. She opened the door to find Dara, the shelter volunteer who'd helped with Kodiak's adoption, wringing her hands. Dust from the shelter clung to her petite frame, and her cropped auburn hair looked wind-blown, as if she'd rushed over without stopping. "I had to come warn you," Dara said, her wire-frame glasses sliding down her nose as she rushed inside. Her fingers left smudges on the lenses as she pushed them back up. "The adoption papers, they're gone. Just vanished from our files. Every single document, every signature, every approval form. Gone?" Tamsin felt her chest tighten, her throat constricting as if someone had reached in and squeezed. "How is that possible? Don't you keep backups?" "Someone's been through everything. Files scattered, records deleted from the computer. They even wiped the backup server." Dara's voice shook, her normally steady demeanor crumbling around the edges. "I've worked at that shelter for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's methodical, deliberate. Someone who knows exactly what they're doing." Kodiak padded over, his three-legged gait surprisingly swift and balanced as he nudged Dara's hand as if sensing her distress. She scratched behind his ears, tears forming in her eyes as she traced the brand mark barely visible beneath his fur. "There's more," Dara continued, swallowing hard. "Garrick's been talking to the other volunteers, the board members. He's making the rounds like some kind of political campaign. He's telling people you're unstable, that you manipulated the adoption process because you're desperate for help with Ivy. He's painting you as some kind of fraud who's using a dangerous animal as a babysitter." Tamsin sank onto the couch, the weight of this new threat pressing her down like a physical force. The light from the window caught the exhaustion etched into her face. "That's ridiculous." Anyone who's seen Kodiak with her, the way he protects her, how he knows when she needs help. No, Dara interrupted, sitting beside her with a hand on her arm. But Garrick has influence. People listen to him. He's donated thousands to the shelter over the years, has his name on 2 of the kennel wings. Half the board members golf with him on weekends. Her fingers tightened on Tamsin's sleeve. And I have to tell you something else. I once signed off on paperwork for him. Years ago. Something felt wrong. But he had all the right documents, so I approved it. I've carried that guilt ever since. That night, Tamsin lay awake, listening to the quiet house. Every creak of the settling building made her tense. Kodiak had taken up his usual post beside Ivy's crib, his breathing steady and watchful, his gray-black coat just visible in the dim nightlight glow. His burn scars seemed to shine with a dull silver sheen in the darkness, testament to whatever past he'd survived. Around 2 a.m, his head shot up, ears alert, muscles tensed beneath his scarred fur. Seconds later, he let out 3 sharp barks, the same pattern he'd used that first night. Not random noise, but a deliberate signal, precise and urgent. Tamsin rushed to Ivy's room just as her daughter's body began to stiffen, her small face contorting with the oncoming seizure. "I've got you, baby," she whispered, carefully turning Ivy to her side, cushioning her head with gentle hands, while Kodiak stood guard, his posture alert but calm, eyes never leaving the child. His warning had given her precious extra seconds to prepare, to ensure Ivy wouldn't hurt herself in the throes of the seizure. "Mama's right here. You're safe." When Keaton arrived for his now regular check-in the next day, his tall frame filling the doorway with a reassuring presence, Tamsin told him about both Dara's warning and Kodiak's alert. Dark circles underlined her eyes, but determination burned within them. "That's the 3rd time he's predicted a seizure," Keaton said thoughtfully, his weathered hands carefully checking Ivy's pulse while Kodiak watched attentively. "And that's not something dogs just do instinctively. I know someone who might help, a trainer who worked with service dogs for veterans. She knows her stuff. Mind if I make a call?" The trainer, Maria Santos, arrived that afternoon, bringing with her a professional demeanor and equipment to test Kodiak's responses. She watched Kodiak interact with Ivy, noting his positioning, his responses, the way he anticipated her movements, writing detailed notes on a clipboard. "These aren't just good instincts," Maria explained, demonstrating several hand signals that Kodiak immediately responded to with military precision. "See how he maintains eye contact? How he checks his surroundings in a systematic pattern? Those are search and rescue behaviors. Highly specialized training that takes years to perfect. And look at this response to vibration. He's been conditioned to detect pre-seizure movements that are imperceptible to humans." She pointed to how Kodiak kept himself between Ivy and the door, his body language relaxed but vigilant. "That's not aggression. It's protection protocol. This dog was trained to save lives. He's positioning himself to intercept any threat while maintaining what we call situational awareness. That's not something you can fake." Hope flickered in Tamsin's chest, small but fierce. "So if we can prove his background, his actual training and history, it would completely discredit Garrick's claims about him being dangerous," Keaton finished, the lines around his kind eyes deepening as he smiled. "No one could argue with professional certification." Maria nodded, her expression serious. "I can write up an official assessment. These patterns are unmistakable to anyone who knows what to look for. I'd stake my professional reputation on this dog being former search and rescue. The question is, how did he end up abandoned with these injuries?" But within days, they discovered just how deep Garrick's influence ran. Maria's certification board received anonymous complaints about her methods. Her supervisor called questioning her, unusual interest in a disputed case. The local service dog registration office lost their application paperwork twice, then claimed there was a new policy requiring additional reviews for potentially dangerous breeds. "He's got people everywhere," Dara reported during another urgent visit, her wireframe glasses perched atop a folder of copied documents she'd smuggled out. The shelter board, animal control, even City Hall, everyone's scared to cross him. People who ask questions suddenly find themselves reassigned or losing their volunteer positions. He's like a spider sitting in the middle of a web. Tamsin watched Kodiak gently guide Ivy away from a sharp table corner, his movements precise and purposeful, his body automatically compensating for his missing leg with seamless balance. This wasn't just about keeping a beloved pet anymore. Something bigger was at stake. Something Garrick was willing to go to extreme lengths to cover up, something that made a wealthy businessman desperate enough to target a struggling single mother. "Look at his ear again," Keaton suggested one evening, examining the burn marks under a bright light while Ivy slept nearby. "That partial code, it could be a registration number. K9 units mark their dogs. If we could find the complete records from before the warehouse fire, there must be a database of working dogs somewhere." But every lead seemed to hit a wall. Former K9 unit members had moved away or wouldn't return calls. Insurance records were sealed pending ongoing investigations. Even the fire department's report was mysteriously under review, despite being over a year old. Yet Kodiak's actions spoke louder than any missing paperwork. He anticipated Ivy's needs with uncanny precision, as if years of professional training had prepared him specifically for this role. When she stumbled, he was there to brace her, his 3 legs sturdy as any 4. When her medication made her dizzy, he guided her to sit, nudging her gently toward the couch. Each day brought new proof that this supposedly dangerous dog was actually a highly skilled service animal with a past someone wanted buried. "We'll find a way," Tamsin promised Ivy, as they watched Kodiak perform his nightly safety check of their apartment, systematically moving from window to door to closet with focused attention. "Whatever Garrick's hiding, whatever happened to Kodiak before, we won't let them take him from us. Some people think being broken means being useless." She touched the faint scar on her own arm, thinking of all the systems and people who'd failed them both. "But sometimes it just means you've survived something others couldn't." The basement of the county records office smelled like dust and forgotten papers, the particular musty scent of bureaucracy left to languish underground. Tamsin sneezed as Keaton pulled another heavy cardboard box from the tall metal shelves, particles dancing in the thin beams of fluorescent light overhead. "These go back about 5 years, he said, setting the container down on a worn wooden table with a dull thud. If Kodiak was part of a search and rescue team, there should be some trace. Service records, training certificates, incident reports, something. His voice carried the steady confidence of someone accustomed to methodically piecing together fragments of truth. Tamsin rubbed her tired eyes, feeling the gritty sensation of exhaustion beneath her lids. They'd been at this for hours, combing through file after file of faded ink and official stamps. Her phone buzzed against the tabletop. Another text from the neighbor watching Ivy. Everything was fine, the message assured, but she couldn't help the familiar tightness in her chest. Being away from Ivy always left her with an uncomfortable hollowness, like missing a vital organ. "Look at this," Keaton said suddenly, his voice sharpening with discovery as he spread out a yellowed newspaper clipping with careful fingers. The bold headline leapt from the page. "Local K9 unit disbanded after tragic warehouse fire." Tamsin leaned closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. The article detailed the loss of 3 service dogs in what was described as a devastating structural collapse. One description made her breath catch, including veteran search dog designation KDK 217, credited with 6 successful mountain rescues and numerous evidence recoveries. "KDK," she whispered, running her fingers over the letters as though they might speak to her. The marks on Kodiak's ear, that brand-like scar, could it be his service number? Keaton was already pulling more files, his movements quick and purposeful. "The fire happened at the River Street storage complex. Wait." He frowned, checking dates on multiple documents, laying them side by side. "The insurance claim was filed through Pacific Northwest Security Holdings. That's odd for a municipal facility." "What's significant about that?" Tamsin asked, leaning over his shoulder to see better in the dim basement lighting. "It's a shell company." Keaton spread out more papers. Business filings, tax records, ownership transfers. His finger traced a line of text near the bottom of one document. "Look who's listed as primary stockholder, Garrick Sloan." Tamsin's hands shook as she read the documents, the connection forming like electric current between frayed wires. The warehouse fire had resulted in a massive insurance payout, nearly $2 million. But buried in the fine print were troubling inconsistencies, qualified statements about accelerants found at the scene, questions from investigators that were never fully addressed. "The investigation was never completed," Keaton noted, his voice tightening as he scanned report after report. "The case was officially closed when the K-9 unit was disbanded. They claimed all evidence was destroyed in the fire. Convenient timing." "Not all evidence," Tamsin said quietly, the realization settling cold and heavy in her stomach. "Kodiak survived, and those marks on his ear. They're not just burn scars," Keaton realized, meeting her eyes. "They're deliberate. Someone tried to destroy his service number, his identification. They wanted to erase what he was." They dug deeper, pulling property records, business filings, old news stories, creating a growing constellation of connections on the tabletop. A disturbing pattern emerged with unsettling clarity. Warehouses and buildings connected to Garrick's shell companies had suffered fires over the years. Each blaze resulted in substantial insurance payments. Each investigation ended prematurely, folded away into file boxes, like the ones surrounding them now. "This is why he wants Kodiak back so badly," Tamsin said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening logic. "A trained search dog would have detected accelerants immediately. Kodiak must have found something that night, evidence, proof of arson, something Garrick couldn't let come to light." Keaton gathered the most damaging documents, carefully photographing each page with his phone. His movements were deliberate, methodical. "We need to be careful here, Tamsin. Garrick's been doing this for years. He's got connections, money, influence. People who ask questions about his business dealings tend to find themselves isolated." "He tried to kill Kodiak." Tamsin's voice shook with anger that rose from somewhere deep and protective. "He hurt him, branded him, and left him for dead, all to cover up his crimes. What kind of monster does that to an animal who only wanted to save lives?" "We need more than circumstantial evidence," Keaton cautioned, his paramedic's instinct for triage evident in his tone. "These records show suspicious patterns, but we need solid proof before we make accusations. One wrong move and Garrick could bury all of this, and us along with it. He's proven he's willing to silence witnesses." They worked late into the night, building their case piece by piece like a delicate structure. The warehouse's original building plans showed multiple exits, but firefighters' reports had noted doors mysteriously welded shut. Insurance adjusters had questioned the sprinkler system's suspicious failure. And in one buried report, a rookie firefighter mentioned a dog barking frantically just before the roof collapsed, a detail that had never made it into the official narrative. He was trying to warn them, Tamsin realized, tears stinging her eyes as she imagined Kodiak doing what he'd been trained to do, even as the building burned around him. That's what he was trained for, to protect people, save lives. and Garrick punished him for it. The cruelty of it made her stomach turn. Keaton squeezed her shoulder gently, his weathered hand warm and steadying. "We'll expose him, Tamsin, but we have to do this right, one step at a time. People like Garrick don't fall easily." They carefully reboxed the files, making sure everything looked undisturbed, erasing all traces of their investigation. As they drove home through the quiet streets, Tamsin's mind raced with all they'd discovered. The scarred, gentle dog who watched over her daughter wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was a survivor of deliberate cruelty, a witness whose testimony had been literally burned away, a hero someone had tried to unmake. When they reached her apartment, Kodiak greeted them at the door, his tail wagging softly in recognition. He'd positioned himself perfectly between Ivy's room and the entrance, alert but calm, fulfilling the duty no one had assigned him. Looking at him now, Tamsin could see what she'd missed before: the disciplined stance of a working dog, the watchful intelligence that no amount of trauma had erased, the unwavering sense of purpose. "We'll make this right," she promised him softly, kneeling to wrap her arms around his neck, feeling his steady heartbeat against her chest. "Whatever it takes, we'll make sure Garrick can't hurt anyone else. Not you, not other dogs, not firefighters, not anyone." But Keaton's warning echoed in her mind, a caution she couldn't ignore. They needed irrefutable proof, documentation that couldn't be explained away or buried in bureaucratic shadows. The truth was there, hidden in Kodiak's scars and sealed records. They just had to find a way to bring it into the light before Garrick realized they were getting close. She stroked Kodiak's damaged ear, tracing the outline of the partial numbers still visible beneath the scar tissue. In those marred digits lay both his identity and their greatest weapon. If only they could prove what they now suspected. Tamsin's kitchen table disappeared under stacks of documents and sticky notes. She, Dara, and Keaton had been working for hours, fueled by coffee and determination. Kodiak lay at their feet, occasionally lifting his head to check on Ivy napping in the next room. "Found it!" Dara's triumphant whisper broke the silence. She held up her tablet, displaying a scanned document. "I always keep backup copies at home. Learned that lesson years ago. This is Kodiak's original intake form, complete with timestamps and signatures." Tamsin leaned in, studying the document. "This proves Garrick wasn't involved in the initial surrender?" "Exactly." Dara adjusted her wireframe glasses, smudging them with dusty fingerprints. "The shelter received Kodiak from animal control after he was found wandering near Industrial District. No chip, no collar, severely injured. Garrick didn't show up claiming ownership until weeks later." Keaton's phone buzzed. He stepped away to answer it, speaking in low tones. When he returned, his expression was hopeful. "That was Marcus at the fire marshal's office. He's willing to pull the original warehouse fire reports, including photos from the scene." "Will that help establish Kodiak's identity?" Tamsin asked. "If we can match his service number or show he was present at the fire, it's another piece of evidence against Garrick's claims." Keaton spread out their documentation. "Combined with the seizure response training evaluation scheduled for next week." A sharp knock at the door cut him off. Kodiak's ears perked up, but he remained steady beside Ivy's room. Two city inspectors stood in the hallway, clipboards ready. "Routine inspection," the taller one announced, though his eyes darted suspiciously around the apartment. For the next hour, they measured doorways, checked smoke detectors, and made extensive notes. Tamsin's stomach knotted as their list of violations grew: peeling paint in the bathroom, a loose cabinet hinge, insufficient ventilation. "We'll need these issues addressed within 72 hours, the inspector declared, handing her a stack of citations. Failure to comply could result in eviction proceedings. Tamsin's hands trembled as she closed the door behind them. "This is Garrick," she said. "He's trying to force us out." "We'll help," Dara assured her. "I know contractors who can—" Another knock interrupted. This time, two women in business attire introduced themselves as child services representatives. "We received an anonymous concern about an aggressive animal in the home," one explained, consulting her notebook. "Given your daughter's medical condition—" "Kodiak is not aggressive," Tamsin stated firmly, though her voice wavered. "He's trained. A three-legged dog with documented burn injuries living with a medically fragile child?" The social worker raised an eyebrow. "You can understand our concern." As if on cue, Ivy's gleeful giggle drifted from her room. The social workers followed the sound. Ivy sat on her playmat, clapping as Kodiak delicately pushed a soft ball toward her with his nose. When she dropped it, he retrieved it carefully, placing it within her reach. Their gentle game continued, Kodiak adjusting his movements to match Ivy's abilities. "Ball!" Ivy exclaimed, reaching for Kodiak. Her coordination, usually challenged by her condition, seemed steadier as she focused on their play. The social workers observed for several minutes, taking notes. Though they left without immediate action, their warnings hung heavy in the air. Further evaluations would be needed, documentation required, home visits scheduled. After they left, Tamsin sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. The stack of violations seemed to mock her from the coffee table. "How can I fight the whole system?" she whispered. Another peal of laughter drew her attention. Ivy had wrapped her arms around Kodiak's neck, pressing her face into his fur. The dog remained perfectly still, supporting her weight, his eyes watchful but peaceful. "That's why," Keaton said softly, sitting beside her. "That right there." Dara gathered their scattered documents with determined energy. "Garrick's using the system against you because it's worked for him before, but systems can be beaten, with the right evidence and the right allies." "The seizure response certification could change everything," Keaton added. "Once Kodiak's officially recognized as a service animal, they can't treat him like a dangerous pet." Tamsin watched her daughter and her dog, their unlikely bond stronger than any bureaucratic threat. Ivy's hands, often shaky, moved with surprising grace as she stroked Kodiak's fur. The dog's presence seemed to ground her, bringing out abilities that usually remained hidden. "Okay." Tamsin straightened her shoulders. "Dara, can you help document Kodiak's shelter history? Everything from intake to adoption?" "Already started." Dara held up her tablet. "I'm also reaching out to other volunteers who witnessed his behavior during his stay." "I'll work with Marcus to reconstruct the warehouse fire investigation," Keaton said. "There might be physical evidence we can still recover, something that ties Kodiak to the scene and proves his training." They worked late into the evening, building their case piece by piece. Every document was copied, every witness statement recorded, every interaction with Ivy and Kodiak carefully logged. The violation notices still loomed, but they felt less threatening now, transformed from obstacles into fuel for their determination. As night fell, Tamsin watched Kodiak guide Ivy through their bedtime routine. He stayed close as she brushed her teeth, steadied her walker with his body, waited patiently while she chose a bedtime story. There was nothing damaged or dangerous in his movements, only grace, intelligence, and unwavering devotion. "They can't take this away," Tamsin murmured, more certain with each passing moment. "They won't." The certification evaluation was only days away. Until then, they would document every moment, gather every ally, and prepare to show the world what she already knew. That sometimes the most extraordinary strength comes in forms others might dismiss as broken. Tamsin's muscles ached from a long day of gathering evidence and documentation. The night air felt heavy as she climbed the stairs to her garage apartment, juggling her purse and a bag of groceries. Something seemed off. She paused, sniffing. A faint chemical smell tickled her nose, like gasoline or lighter fluid. Her heart skipped a beat. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, watching Ivy while Kodiak kept his usual vigilant post by the toddler's playmat. Everything looked normal, but that smell. The moment she unlocked the door, intense heat slammed into her. Orange flames erupted from the kitchen, racing up the walls with unnatural speed. The smoke detector screamed as thick black smoke billowed toward the ceiling. "Ivy!" Tamsin dropped everything, lunging forward. "Mrs. Chen!" The elderly woman was already scrambling toward her, coughing. "Fire! So fast, came from nowhere!" "Where's Ivy?" Tamsin's voice cracked with panic. "Nursery. Kodiak." Mrs. Chen gestured before doubling over in another coughing fit. "Get out! Call 911!" Tamsin pushed her neighbor toward the door, then dropped to her hands and knees. The smoke was getting thicker, stinging her eyes and burning her throat. Through the haze, she saw Kodiak's dark shape dart past her toward Ivy's nursery. The dog moved with incredible speed despite his missing leg, disappearing into the burning hallway. "No, wait!" The heat was becoming unbearable. Tamsin crawled forward, pressing her shirt over her mouth. The flames had spread to the ceiling now, making the whole apartment crackle and groan. The nursery seemed miles away. Her palms blistered against the scorching floor, but she kept moving. "Ivy! Kodiak!" She reached the doorway just as a section of ceiling collapsed behind her. Inside, through stinging tears and thick smoke, she made out a shape on the floor. Kodiak had somehow grabbed Ivy's blanket and was covering both himself and the toddler, creating a small pocket of cleaner air. Ivy wasn't crying. She seemed almost peaceful under Kodiak's protection. The dog's eyes met Tamsin's, and he whimpered softly, his burned paws trembling but his body remaining firmly positioned over the child. "Good boy," Tamsin choked out. "Such a good boy." She could hear sirens now, but the roar of the fire was getting louder. The window exploded inward, showering them with glass. Tamsin threw herself over both Kodiak and Ivy, just as voices shouted from outside. "In here!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Please!" The next few minutes blurred together. Firefighters in masks appeared through the smoke. Strong hands lifted them, all three of them, because Kodiak refused to leave Ivy's side even as the rescuers carried them out. The cool night air hit Tamsin's lungs like a shock. She couldn't stop coughing, but her eyes were fixed on Ivy, who was already being placed on a stretcher. The toddler's face was smudged with soot, but her breathing seemed steady. "Mama?" Ivy reached for her, then for Kodiak. "Koda hurt." Tamsin's heart clenched as she saw the dog's paws. The pads were badly burned, and patches of his fur were singed. Yet he kept trying to stand, to get closer to Ivy despite the paramedics' attempts to keep him still. "Remarkable animal," one of the firefighters said, shaking his head. "Found them perfectly positioned. The blanket, the way he was keeping the smoke out, almost like he was trained for it." The hospital staff later echoed the same sentiment. "A miracle," the emergency room doctor declared, examining Ivy. The dog's position created just enough protection from the worst of the smoke. Any longer, though. Tamsin sat by Ivy's bed in the pediatric ward, one hand stroking Kodiak's head where he lay heavily sedated on a blanket beside them. The veterinarian had treated his burns on site, unwilling to separate him from his charges. Their apartment was gone. Everything they owned had burned. But as Tamsin watched Ivy sleeping peacefully, Kodiak's bandaged form rising and falling with each breath beside her, she knew they had kept what mattered most. A police officer appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Kepler? We found evidence of accelerant. This wasn't an accident." Tamsin nodded slowly, remembering that chemical smell. She thought of Garrick, of how far he would go to silence a dog who knew too much. But looking at Kodiak's burned paws, injuries earned saving her daughter not once but twice now, she felt her fear transforming into something stronger. The three-legged dog had faced fire before. He had survived, had found his way to them, had turned his trauma into an unshakable drive to protect. Now, watching over Ivy even in his injured state, he showed no sign of backing down. "We'll need your statement," the officer continued, "and the fire marshal wants to speak with you about—" "Tomorrow," Tamsin said firmly. "Right now we need to rest." She settled back in her chair, one hand on Ivy's small fingers, the other resting gently on Kodiak's unburned fur. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Through the sterile hospital corridors, Tamsin watched the sunrise paint weak shadows across the linoleum floor. Her shoulders ached from sleeping in the chair, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Kodiak lay curled beside Ivy's bed, his bandaged paws carefully arranged to avoid pressure. Every few hours, he would lift his head to check on the sleeping toddler, then settle back with a quiet whimper. The nurses had tried to enforce the no pets policy at first, but something about the dog's unwavering vigilance had softened their stance. Maybe it was the way he had positioned himself between Ivy and the door, or how his presence seemed to keep her nightmares at bay. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Keaton stood in the doorway, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He'd been stopping by every morning before his shift, and again in the evenings. "Thought you could use this," he said softly, handing her a cup. The warmth seeped into her smoke-roughened hands. "Thanks." Tamsin's voice was still raspy. "Any word from the fire marshal?" Keaton's jaw tightened. "They're being careful with their statements, but the accelerant traces are clear. Someone wanted that fire to look like an accident." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. The screen displayed her landlord's number. With trembling fingers, she opened the email he'd sent. "Notice of eviction," she read aloud, the words bitter on her tongue. "Due to fire-related hazards and violation of pet policies. Immediate termination of lease." Her voice cracked. "He's kicking us out. We don't even have anywhere to go back to, and he's making it official." Keaton moved closer, reading over her shoulder. "This isn't right. The fire investigation isn't even complete." "It's Garrick," Tamsin said. "It has to be. First, the shelter paperwork disappears. Then the fire. Now this?" She glanced at Kodiak, who had raised his head at her distress. "He wants to make sure we have nowhere to turn." As if on cue, another message arrived, this time from Child Services. The caseworker they'd spoken to after Garrick's complaints wanted to schedule an emergency review of Ivy's living situation. "They're saying the fire proves their concerns about safety risks," Tamsin whispered, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. "They want to evaluate if I'm providing a stable environment." Kodiak struggled to his feet, ignoring his burned paws to press his head against her leg. The simple gesture of comfort nearly broke her. "I'll call my lawyer friend," Keaton said firmly. "This is harassment, plain and simple." The door opened again, revealing Dara from the shelter. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled, and she clutched a laptop to her chest. "I had to show you right away," she said, pulling up a chair. "I was checking the shelter's database. Something felt off about those missing papers. Look at this." She turned the screen toward them. "This is Kodiak's intake record from last week." The page showed basic details: breed, age estimate, condition notes. "Now watch what happens when I check the archived version." A few clicks revealed a different page, one with a longer history, more detailed medical notes, and most importantly, an original ID number. "Someone's been deleting information," Dara explained, her voice shaking with anger. Not just paper files. They're actually modifying the database to erase Kodiak's history. I found traces of at least 3 different edits in the past week. Tamsin stared at the screen, her throat tight. Can you prove who did it? The changes were made using an administrator account, but Dara hesitated. I recognized the pattern. It's the same thing that happened 2 years ago when Garrick was bringing in those suspicious transport dogs. Files would change, histories would vanish, and somehow all the paperwork would end up perfect for whatever he needed. On the bed, Ivy stirred restlessly. Kodiak immediately turned his attention to her, nosing at her hand until she settled again. The sight made Tamsin's heart ache. This dog, branded and burned and still bearing new wounds, had saved her daughter twice. And now someone was trying to erase him, as if he never existed. We can't let them win, she said quietly. Ivy needs him, and he needs us. The fire marshal's office will want to see this, Keaton said, taking pictures of Dara's screen. It establishes a pattern of tampering with records. Be careful, Dara warned. Garrick has friends everywhere. The shelter director still won't admit anything's wrong, even with proof right in front of her. Tamsin reached down to gently stroke Kodiak's head, careful to avoid his singed fur. His eyes met hers, full of trust and determination, despite everything he'd been through. They tried to silence him once before, she said. Left him for dead in that warehouse fire. But he survived. He found us. She straightened in her chair, ignoring the ache in her muscles. And this time, he's not facing it alone. The morning sun had risen fully now, warming the small hospital room. Ivy slept on, one small hand resting on Kodiak's bandaged paw. Outside, the system might be turning against them, influenced by Garrick's quiet power. But in here, watching her daughter breathe easily under the protection of this extraordinary dog, Tamsin felt her resolve harden like steel. Tamsin sat at her daughter's hospital bedside, the eviction notice crumpled in her trembling hands. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the linoleum floor, and the steady beep of monitors created a rhythm that matched her racing heart. I don't know what to do anymore, she whispered, more to herself than to Kodiak, who lay at her feet with his bandaged paws. If we lose the apartment... She couldn't finish the sentence. The ultimatum from her landlord had arrived that morning, a formal letter stating she had 48 hours to either remove the dog or vacate the premises. No extensions, no negotiations. The words, liability concerns and immediate compliance required, burned in her mind. Ivy needed stable housing for her medical care. The specialists, the equipment, the routines they'd carefully built. It all depended on having a home base. But the thought of surrendering Kodiak made her physically ill. He'd saved Ivy's life twice now. How could she betray that? We could stay with my sister, she said aloud, trying to convince herself. Except her building doesn't allow pets either, and she's an hour from Ivy's doctors. The walls of impossible choices seemed to close in tighter with each passing minute. Kodiak lifted his head, ears perking up seconds before a knock at the door announced Keaton's arrival. His face was flushed with excitement, a stark contrast to her despair. I found something, he said, pulling up a chair. Or rather someone. A former K-9 handler named Rory Pike. He worked search and rescue until about 2 years ago. Tamsin straightened, hope flickering faintly. The warehouse fire? Exactly. Keaton leaned forward. I showed him a photo of that code on Kodiak's ear. Tamsin, he nearly fell apart. Says it matches his partner's identification exactly. A dog named Coda, who supposedly died in that fire. At the name Coda, Kodiak's head snapped up. A low whine escaped him, and he tried to stand despite his injuries. Easy, boy, Tamsin soothed, but her hands were shaking. Coda, is that your name? The dog's tail thumped against the floor, his eyes suddenly bright with recognition. "Rory's been fighting the system for 2 years," Keaton continued. "He never believed the official story. Said the remains they showed him didn't match Coda's markings. Then suddenly all the documentation changed. Dates, ID numbers, everything. But he kept copies of the originals." Tamsin's mind raced. "And Garrick, how does he fit in?" "His kennel handled the department's canine boarding and medical records. Rory says things started getting strange after Garrick took over. Dogs' histories being altered, training certificates backdated. He filed complaints, but they disappeared into the bureaucracy." "Just like our shelter paperwork," Tamsin murmured. She looked at Kodiak, at Coda, seeing him in a new light. Not just a rescued dog, but a stolen one. A witness someone had tried very hard to silence. "Where is Rory now?" she asked. "That's the best part. He's on his way here. As soon as he saw the photo, he dropped everything. Said he'd know his partner anywhere, burns or no burns." As if summoned by the words, another knock came at the door. A man entered, probably late 30s, compact and broad-shouldered, with a slight limp. His weathered face showed years of outdoor work, but his eyes were sharp and alert. The moment he stepped into the room, Kodiak erupted in a series of soft whines. He dragged himself up, trembling with effort, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. "Oh, God," Rory breathed. "It is you. It's really you, buddy." He dropped to his knees, and Kodiak pressed against him, crying with joy. "I knew you weren't gone. I knew it." Tamsin watched through tears as man and dog reunited. Rory's hands shook as they traced the familiar markings, pausing over new scars, but always returning to the coded tag that had brought them back together. "They told me he was dead," Rory said finally, his voice rough. "Showed me paperwork, dental records, everything. But the dates were wrong. Little things didn't add up. Then suddenly all the records changed, and my complaints vanished. They forced early retirement on me, said my leg injury made me unreliable." "Garrick," Tamsin said. "He's been trying to get Coda back since. We adopted him." Rory's face hardened. "Garrick Sloan is a piece of work. We were investigating a series of suspicious fires when Coda disappeared. He'd been alerting on accelerants at scenes where the official report said accidental. That warehouse was the biggest one yet. And now there's been another fire," Keaton added quietly. "Right here." "The same pattern," Rory agreed. "Create a crisis, destroy the evidence, change the records. But he didn't count on Coda surviving, or finding people who'd fight for him." Tamsin looked at the eviction notice still clutched in her hand. "We're running out of options. They're using the system against us. Housing, child services, everything." "No," Rory said firmly. "You've got backup now. I've kept everything. Original documents, training records, even photos of Coda's ID code. And I've got friends in the fire marshal's office who never bought the warehouse story. We can prove who he really is." "Will it be enough?" Tamsin asked. "Garrick has so much influence." "Truth beats influence," Rory said, "especially when it comes with teeth." He scratched behind Coda's ears, earning another tail wag. "You took care of my partner when I couldn't. Now let us help you fight back." For the first time in days, Tamsin felt the weight on her chest lighten slightly. They weren't alone anymore. The pieces were coming together. The warehouse fire, the missing records, Garrick's desperate attempts to reclaim Coda. Whatever truth the dog had uncovered 2 years ago, it was still dangerous enough to make powerful people nervous. Rory pulled out his phone, thumbing through old photos. "See here? This was Coda 2 years ago, before the warehouse fire. Same markings on his chest, same white patch near his tail, and most importantly..." He zoomed in on one image showing a close-up of the dog's ear. "Same ID code. They couldn't erase that." Tamsin leaned closer, comparing the photo to Kodiak's scarred ear. Despite the burn damage, the matching numbers were unmistakable. "We need to document this properly," she said, her nurse's training kicking in. "Photos, measurements, everything." "Already on it," Keaton replied, pulling out his own phone. "I've got a friend at the vet clinic who can scan for his microchip. That's something even Garrick couldn't fake." They drove to the emergency veterinary clinic, where Dr. Martinez was waiting after hours. The vet ran the scanner over Kodiak's shoulder, and the machine beeped. "Got it," she said, studying the screen. "Chip number matches the original K9 unit records. This is definitely your partner, Mr. Pike." Rory's hands trembled as he signed the affidavit Dr. Martinez had prepared. "I, Rory Pike, hereby attest that this animal is the K9 officer known as Coda, badge number K947, previously reported deceased following the warehouse fire at 1242 Industrial Parkway on June 15, 2021. His voice grew stronger as he detailed the events of that night. "We were investigating reports of accelerant traces. Coda had alerted multiple times near the loading dock. Then there was an explosion. I got knocked back, hit my head. When I came to in the hospital, they told me Coda didn't make it. Showed me remains they claimed were his, but the dental records didn't match our baseline scans." "And Garrick's involvement?" Keaton prompted. "His company handled all our K9 medical records and boarding. He's the one who produced the death certificate and arranged for the remains to be immediately cremated, against protocol. When I started asking questions, documents started changing. Training dates, medical histories, everything got scrambled. Then they pushed me into retirement, said my head injury made me unreliable." Dr. Martinez added her own sworn statement about the microchip match and Kodiak's injuries. "These burns are consistent with the timeline Mr. Pike describes. And there are older fractures that were never properly treated, likely from the warehouse incident." Tamsin felt sick thinking about Coda suffering alone all that time. But he'd found them. Through all the manipulation and lies, he'd found his way to people who would fight for him. Back at her temporary apartment, they spread their evidence across the kitchen table. Rory's original documentation, the microchip records, photos of Kodiak's identifying marks, Dr. Martinez's statement. The shelter intake forms Dara had managed to save. "The seizure hearing is in 3 days, Keaton said, organizing the papers. "We need to be ready for anything. Garrick won't go down without a fight." "He can't," Rory agreed grimly. "If Coda's identity is proven, people will start asking why he was hidden. The warehouse fire investigation might get reopened. A lot of insurance money changed hands after that accident." Tamsin watched Kodiak, Coda, curled protectively around sleeping Ivy. "He's not just after the dog, is he? He's trying to bury the evidence of something bigger." "Multiple suspicious fires, all ruled accidental," Keaton mused. "All with convenient insurance payouts. And a trained accelerant detection dog who suddenly disappears after alerting at the biggest scene." "My partner was trying to tell us something that night," Rory said softly. "Now he's got a second chance. But we have to protect him, and you, until the hearing." Tamsin squared her shoulders. "Then we'll be ready. I'm not letting anyone hurt my family again." She looked at the scattered evidence of truth finally coming to light. "We have proof now. Real proof. They can't just make it disappear." Keaton reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You're not alone in this fight anymore. We'll face whatever comes together." They worked late into the night, making copies of everything, storing backup files in multiple locations. Rory's testimony would be crucial. His first-hand knowledge of Coda's training, the suspicious pattern of fires, Garrick's manipulation of records. Though microchip evidence provided undeniable physical proof of the dog's true identity. But it was more than just documents and data. It was the story of a loyal partner separated from his handler, a dog who survived abuse and abandonment, yet never lost his instinct to protect. A mother and daughter who gave him a second chance, only to discover he'd been saving them all along. As midnight approached, Tamsin felt the weight of tomorrow pressing in. The hearing would determine not just Coda's fate, but the unraveling of years of corruption. Garrick's carefully constructed facade was about to crack, and desperate men were dangerous. She looked at Ivy sleeping peacefully, Coda standing guard despite his injuries. The truth had found its way home, carried in the heart of a dog everyone had tried to forget. Now they just had to make sure justice followed. "Get some rest," Keaton advised, gathering his coat. "Rory and I will pick you up in the morning. We'll go over everything again before the hearing." Tamsin nodded, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you, all of you. I don't know what we would have done." "Thank him," Rory said, patting Coda's head one last time. "He chose you for a reason. Now we're going to make sure he gets to stay right where he belongs." After they left, Tamsin sank onto the couch beside Coda. "You've been carrying this secret so long," she whispered. "But you're not alone anymore either. We're going to make this right." Coda pressed his head against her knee, and Tamsin felt the familiar surge of determination. This wasn't just about keeping a beloved pet. It was about exposing lies, protecting the vulnerable, and finally bringing hidden truths into the light. The hearing would decide everything. But for tonight, they were safe. For tonight, they had proof and allies and hope. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but they would face them together. The county hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floor as Tamsin gripped the edge of her chair. The air felt thick with tension, and her heart hammered against her ribs. Garrick sat across the aisle, perfectly composed in an expensive charcoal suit. His silver hair caught the light as he leaned forward, whispering to his attorney. The confident smirk playing at the corners of his mouth made Tamsin's stomach turn. Kodiak lay at her feet, his presence steady and grounding. Keaton sat beside her, while Rory Pike waited in the hallway as their key witness. The hearing officer, Ms. Delaney, adjusted her glasses and called the room to order. "This hearing concerns the disputed ownership and disposition of the canine known as Kodiak," she began, her voice carrying through the cramped space. "Mr. Sloane, as the petitioner, you may present first." Garrick rose smoothly, straightening his tie. "Thank you, Your Honor." He gestured to his attorney, who began distributing documents. "I can prove, through these records, that the dog in question is my property, registered under my kennel license." Tamsin's hands shook as she examined the paperwork. The dates, the signatures, everything looked official, but she knew it was all fabricated. Beside her, Keaton made quiet notes. "Furthermore," Garrick continued, his voice taking on an edge of concern, "this animal has a documented history of aggression. It would be irresponsible to leave him with a single mother and a disabled child." He pulled out more papers. "These incident reports detail multiple attacks." "Objection," Tamsin's lawyer interrupted. "These alleged incidents were never reported to animal control or any official body. We request verification of their authenticity." Ms. Delaney nodded. "Noted. Please continue, Mr. Sloane." Garrick launched into a practiced speech about public safety and responsible ownership. With each word, Tamsin felt her anger rising. How dare he paint Kodiak, gentle, protective Kodiak, as some kind of monster? When it was finally their turn, Tamsin stood on shaky legs. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that proves not only Kodiak's true identity, but Mr. Sloane's deliberate deception." She distributed their carefully prepared packets. First, the microchip registry. She walked the hearing officer through the documentation, her voice growing stronger. "The chip number matches records from the K9 Search and Rescue Unit, where Kodiak, then known as Coda, served with distinction." Garrick's lawyer jumped up. "Objection! This is speculation." "If I may continue," Tamsin pressed on, "we have a sworn statement from Rory Pike, Coda's original handler." She gestured toward the door where Rory waited. "He can positively identify this dog and testify to the circumstances of his disappearance." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Garrick's confident expression flickered for just a moment. Tamsin held up photographs. "These show the burned kennel where Kodiak was hidden after the warehouse fire. Note the dates on the timestamps." She passed them forward. "And these show his distinctive ear markings and scars, which match Mr. Pike's detailed descriptions from before his disappearance." The hearing officer studied the images with growing interest. "And you have documentation of the missing shelter records?" "Yes, Your Honor." Tamsin produced Dara's recovered files. "Someone systematically altered or deleted Kodiak's intake information, but we recovered backup data showing—" A sharp bark cut through her words. Everyone jumped as Kodiak suddenly stood, hackles raised, staring intently at Garrick's leather briefcase on the floor. His bark came again, 3 sharp sounds in quick succession. The room fell silent. Kodiak remained focused, his posture rigid with alertness. It was the same stance he took before Ivy's seizures, the same urgent warning. "Control that animal," Garrick snapped, but there was something new in his voice. Fear. Kodiak didn't move, didn't break his concentration. Another bark echoed through the hall. "Your Honor," Keaton spoke up, "I've witnessed this behavior before. This is a trained alert, not aggression. As a paramedic, I've seen Kodiak give the same warning before medical emergencies." "He's a highly trained detection dog," Tamsin added quickly. "This specific pattern of barking is how he signals—" "This is ridiculous," Garrick interrupted, reaching for his briefcase. "The dog is clearly unstable." But Kodiak's barking grew more insistent. People began shifting in their seats, the atmosphere in the room transforming from skepticism to uncertainty. The hearing officer held up her hand for silence, studying the scene before her with sharp eyes. The dog's unwavering focus on Garrick's briefcase hung in the air like an accusation. In that suspended moment, Tamsin saw doubt creep across faces that had been dismissive just minutes before. Something was happening, something unplanned and powerful that cut through all the careful legal maneuvering. Kodiak maintained his alert, professional and precise, while Garrick's polished facade began to crack around the edges. The energy in the room had shifted dramatically, and everyone could feel it. This wasn't just about ownership anymore. This was about truth breaking through deception, about a dog's unshakable integrity exposing human corruption. The hearing officer raised her hand, her expression firm and unyielding. "Given the dog's clear alert behavior, I'm requesting security to examine that briefcase, Mr. Sloan." "This is absurd," Garrick sputtered, but his face had gone pale, a sheen of sweat breaking out across his forehead. The perfectly maintained facade of control was beginning to crack. "You can't possibly—" "Actually, we can." Officer Martinez stepped forward, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. His stance was wide, authoritative. "Given the ongoing arson investigation, we have probable cause. The dog's behavior constitutes reasonable suspicion in these circumstances." Garrick's hand tightened on the briefcase handle, his knuckles turning white with strain. His eyes darted nervously around the room like a cornered animal. "This is private property. You need a warrant." "Not in a public hearing where reasonable suspicion exists," Martinez countered, his voice steady and confident. 2 more officers moved to flank him, their hands resting casually near their belts. The tension in the room thickened like smoke. Tamsin held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could taste metal in her mouth as Garrick's eyes darted between the exits, calculating his chances. Beside her, Kodiak maintained his alert position, unwavering and determined. His 3 legs planted firmly on the ground, his body rigid with purpose. The scars on his coat seemed to stand out more prominently now, testament to what this man had done. "Sir, place the briefcase on the table and step back," Martinez ordered, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. For a moment, no one moved. The room seemed suspended in breathless anticipation. Then Garrick shoved the briefcase at the nearest officer with unexpected force and bolted toward the door. The crowd gasped and scattered like startled birds as he shouldered his way through, expensive suit fabric ripping at the seam with the violent motion. Tamsin didn't think. She just acted, adrenaline flooding her system. "Keaton, watch Kodiak!" she called over her shoulder, already running. Her feet seemed to move of their own accord. She knew these halls from weeks of hearings, knew the shortest path to the parking lot where Garrick would undoubtedly head. While officers radioed for backup, voices crackling with urgency over their comms, she cut through a side corridor, burst through the emergency exit, and sprinted to her dented minivan. The cool metal of the door handle grounded her momentarily as she yanked it open. Her hands shook violently as she jammed the key into the ignition, missing twice before it caught. The engine roared to life just as Garrick emerged from the building, his silver hair disheveled, his predatory composure completely abandoned. She threw the van into drive and accelerated with a jerk, tires squealing against the asphalt as she positioned her vehicle to block the lot's only exit. Garrick skidded to a stop on the pavement, trapped between Tamsin's van and the approaching officers who were now pouring from the building's exits. His perfect composure had completely crumbled, revealing the desperate man beneath the polished exterior. "Move that vehicle!" he shouted, face contorted with rage and disbelief that a nobody like her would dare stand against him. "No," Tamsin said firmly, even though he couldn't hear her through the closed windows. The single syllable felt like a declaration of war against all he represented. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white, ready to redirect if he tried to slip past. The engine hummed beneath her, vibrating through her body like a second heartbeat. Police cruisers converged from all directions, lights flashing in a dizzying, strobing effect across the parking lot. Martinez's voice boomed through a megaphone, authoritative and final. "Garrick Sloan, you are under arrest. Put your hands where we can see them, now." Inside the building, officers were methodically examining the briefcase contents, laying items out on the hearing room table. They found stolen shelter documents with corners bent and coffee-stained, adoption records with clumsily forged signatures, and, most damning, traces of accelerant in a small vial that, according to the evidence technician's preliminary test, matched samples from both the warehouse fire that nearly killed Kodiak and Tamsin's apartment blaze that had left those thin, pink scars on her arms. Tamsin watched through her windshield as officers cuffed Garrick, the metallic click audible, even through the glass. His expensive suit was rumpled and dirty at the knees where they'd made him kneel, his careful mask of authority shattered beyond repair. As they led him past her van toward the waiting police car, he looked up with pure hatred in his eyes, the unfiltered malice of a man who viewed compassion as weakness and control as his birthright. She met his gaze steadily, no longer afraid of the man who had tried to burn away her security, her home, her daughter's protector. Back in the hearing room, the shelter director, Ms. Chen, stood with tears glistening in her eyes, her professional demeanor momentarily cracked with genuine emotion. "Ms. Kepler, I owe you and Kodiak a profound apology. We should have investigated more thoroughly when you first raised concerns about Mr. Sloane's business practices and Kodiak's background." Kodiak sat calmly at Tamsin's feet, his scarred ear twitching slightly as Miss Chen continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm immediately restoring full adoption rights to you, with no restrictions or further monitoring required. Furthermore, I pledge our shelter's complete cooperation with the ongoing investigation into Mr. Sloane's activities. No stone will remain unturned." "There may be other cases," Keaton suggested quietly, from where he stood protectively near Tamsin, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. "Other records he altered, other animals he used in his schemes. This might be bigger than just Kodiak." Ms. Chen nodded gravely, a new determination hardening her features. "We'll review everything, every adoption, every euthanasia record, every transfer document. This kind of exploitation ends today." She turned to address the crowded room, her voice carrying to the farthest corner. "Let the record show that Kodiak is officially and rightfully placed with Tamsin Kepler and her daughter Ivy, with our shelter's highest recommendation and sincerest apologies for the delay and distress." The hearing officer made it official with a sharp rap of her gavel, the sound echoing with finality. Around them, people burst into spontaneous applause, some wiping tears, others exchanging relieved glances. Tamsin felt tears welling up as she knelt to hug Kodiak, burying her face in his coarse fur that smelled faintly of the lavender shampoo Ivy insisted they use. He'd been right all along. The loyal, brave dog who'd saved her daughter from seizures, exposed the truth about Garrick's crimes, and never given up despite everything that had been done to him. "Let's go home, boy," she whispered against his ear, feeling his strong heartbeat against her chest. "Ivy's waiting for us. She's going to be so happy." The crowd parted respectfully as they walked out together, the determined mother with light brown hair falling loose from her ponytail, and the three-legged shepherd with the gray-black coat who had brought down a criminal enterprise through simple, steadfast truth. Kodiak walked with dignity beside her, his missing leg forgotten in the perfect balance he'd found in his new purpose. Behind them, officers continued gathering evidence, bagging items and taking photographs, but Tamsin didn't look back. She had everything she needed right beside her, the future stretching ahead with newfound security and the knowledge that sometimes broken things become the strongest when they heal together. Sunlight streamed through the windows of their new ground-floor apartment, painting warm squares on the freshly laid carpet. Tamsin watched as Ivy gripped the edge of the coffee table, her tiny legs trembling with effort. Kodiak lay perfectly still beside her, his steady presence giving her the confidence to try another wobbly step. "That's it, baby," Tamsin encouraged softly, her heart swelling. "You're doing so great." Ivy's face scrunched in concentration as she moved one foot forward, then the other. Her special ankle braces squeaked slightly with each movement. Kodiak's eyes never left her, his head turning to follow her progress. The service dog vest he wore gleamed with new patches, official certification that had arrived just last week. "Look at our girl go," Keaton said from where he was assembling a bookshelf. Tools were scattered around him, and the smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air. He'd been helping them settle in for days, refusing to let Tamsin tackle the moving process alone. Ivy reached the end of the coffee table and wavered uncertainly. Without prompting, Kodiak shifted position, offering his sturdy frame as support. She grabbed his harness handle, specially designed for her small hands, and giggled as she steadied herself. "Coda help," she declared proudly, patting his head with her free hand. Tamsin blinked back tears. These moments still caught her off guard, the simple joy of watching her daughter grow stronger, supported by unwavering love. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of change. After Garrick's arrest, evidence had poured in about his years of corruption. Other families had come forward with similar stories of intimidation and fraud. The new apartment was their fresh start. Located in a quiet complex with a fenced yard, it welcomed both children and service animals. The landlord had even installed special safety features after hearing their story. No more rickety stairs, No more faulty wiring. No more fear. "Time for medicine, Sweet Pea," Tamsin said, checking her watch. Ivy's new medical alert bracelet glinted as she reached for Kodiak's harness again. Together they made their way to the kitchen, Ivy taking careful steps, the dog matching her pace perfectly. Keaton paused his work to watch them, a soft smile on his face. He'd become such a constant presence in their lives, bringing not just practical help but genuine care. Just yesterday, he'd spent hours installing nightlights in every room, making sure Ivy would never feel scared in the dark. "You know," he said, setting down his screwdriver. "The fire station's having a community day next weekend. They're bringing the therapy dogs for the kids. Might be nice for Ivy to meet some other working dogs." Tamsin measured out Ivy's medication while considering the invitation. A few months ago, she would have hesitated, worried about taking Ivy into crowded spaces. But now, with Kodiak's alert abilities officially recognized and his training expanding daily, she felt more confident. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "Doesn't it, Ivy? Want to meet some other helper dogs like Coda?" "More dogs." Ivy clapped her hands, then reached to touch the bandage still wrapped around Kodiak's paw. The burns were healing well, but he'd likely always carry those scars, just like the ones on his ear that had helped expose the truth. "Gentle, remember?" Tamsin reminded her. Ivy nodded solemnly, switching to feather-light pats. Kodiak responded by gently licking her hand, making her giggle again. The afternoon light shifted, creating new patterns on the walls of their home. Home. The word felt real now, solid and safe. Tamsin watched as Keaton returned to his project, humming under his breath. Ivy had settled on her playmat, carefully arranging blocks while Kodiak dozed beside her, still positioned to alert if needed. "Mama, look!" Ivy called suddenly. She'd managed to stack 3 blocks, a new achievement for her developing motor skills. "I build." "That's amazing, sweetheart." Tamsin moved to kneel beside her daughter, marveling at how much stronger she grew each day. The doctors were optimistic about her progress, especially with Kodiak's assistance reducing anxiety and preventing injury during seizures. Kodiak lifted his head, ears perking at Ivy's excitement. His dark eyes held such intelligence, such devotion. He wasn't just a service dog. He was their guardian, their hero, their family. The scars and missing leg that once marked him as broken now told a story of survival and courage. "You know what?" Tamsin said softly, reaching to scratch behind Kodiak's ears. "I think we all needed saving, and we found each other just in time." Ivy leaned against Kodiak's side, her small hand pressed gently against his bandaged paw. The gesture had become her way of showing love, tender touch where there had been pain. Tamsin felt warmth spread through her chest as she watched them together. This was their victory. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just healing, but growing stronger. She caught Keaton's eye across the room and saw her own joy reflected there. They had built something precious from the broken pieces of the past.